Hi everybody, welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. This email right here led me to some very fascinating places, some of which I'll cover in this video, and some of which I'll have to probably make future videos. But some of it has to do with the subject line, but there's more. Subject line, light surrounding the Salt Lake Temple. This is from Jay Doherty or Dougherty. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, so I'm sorry about that. Hi, Jared. I finished listening to this incredible talk by Truman G. Madsen that he gave in 1972, just after the Provo Temple was dedicated. In it, he references the Salt Lake Temple dedication a few times, one of which was a report of there being a glow and a light surrounding the Salt Lake Temple during the dedication that was, quote unquote, not from electricity. Perhaps this doesn't perfectly align with the types of things you are seeking for your spreadsheets. Jay, I don't know how long you've been watching my channel. This does perfectly align. This perfectly aligns. But I know you've been collecting a lot of stuff about the Salt Lake Temple dedication and rededication. In any case, if you want to listen to just that part, start the video around 27 minutes and 30 seconds. So I'll put this YouTube video in the description box below in case you want to listen to it. We're going to be going to BYU speeches, and this was delivered March 5th, 1972. It's called A House of Glory, and Truman G. Madsen is professor, or was professor of philosophy at BYU. Okay, like I said, this took me to some really interesting and unexpected places. We're going to go down to this section called The Temple and Power. The Salt Lake Temple was dedicated with a sense of sacrifice and gratitude that maybe we have not reached. 40 years, 20,000 people gathered just to see the laying of the capstone, and Lorenzo Snow, one of the 12, led them in the Hosanna shout that is now familiar to you. And then Wilford Woodruff, who had had a dream years before that he would somehow be involved in the dedication of that temple, and he was the president of the church, promised that a strict reading of the requirements of worthiness would not be imposed, provided the people come feasting and repenting. Okay, hold on. Let's read that part again. And then Wilford Woodruff, who had had a dream years before that he would somehow be involved in the dedication of that temple. Okay, I had not come across that, and I have a spreadsheet called Quotes, Visions, and Visitations. It's a timeline of every vision, visitation, dream, near-death experience, or end-of-life experience of a general authority or someone that they know, like a family member or something like that. And what surprised me, it's been a while since we've looked at this spreadsheet, but I thought that I already had some associated with the dedication of the Salt Lake Temple, but I don't have any on here. I know that there were visions and visitations. And this one has to do not only with the dedication of the Salt Lake Temple, but about 50 years before the dedication. Okay, so look, this is what I had to do. I tried to find where I could find this account. I was led to this, and here's the PDF of it. I'll put a link for this in the description box below. Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, the Salt Lake Temple dedication by Brian H. Stuy. And he had a reference to this. This is Francis A. Hammond Journals. This one's for 1893 in the Church History Catalog. And you have to go to Monday, April 10th, 1893. Now, in this PDF, he didn't have the entire thing transcribed, the entire account, but I went ahead and went through the painstaking process of trying to read this word by word, and I got the whole account. So I'm not going to read it from here. I'm going to read my transcription. Okay, so the setting. Um, this is Wilford Woodruff. At that time, he was not president of the church. This was 1849, so just a couple years after the Saints uh, first went to Utah. And in that year, Wilford Woodruff was in Boston, Massachusetts. Okay. So, what I'm about to read, I put this according to the year that the vision is actually received. That's why I have it here in 1849. But this is what's in the journal for the dedication of the Salt Lake Temple. It was a multi-day event, and this was on Monday, April 10th, 1893. President Woodruff, oh, by the way, I copied this exactly how it was in the journal. So if there's any grammatical mistakes or errors, it's because that's how it was in the journal. President Woodruff related his vision he had in Boston some 50 years ago, how the Lord showed him the saints would move to the Rocky Mountains and build this temple, and he would be called upon to open it to the people and dedicate it to the Lord. How Brigham Young had twice appeared to him and delivered the keys of the temple. Okay, so really quick, this first part, like I said, the Saints had already reached the Salt Lake Valley in 1847. So I'm thinking that his vision was the Saints would continue to move to Utah because it wasn't all done in 1847. I can't remember the dates, but it was like from 1847 till I don't know when. If you know, put it in the comments below. But he saw the temple in vision being built. And then this part right here talking about Brigham Young, this is now in the present tense in 1893. At this point, Brigham Young had already passed away. He passed away in 1877. So since his passing away, President Brigham Young had twice appeared to him and delivered the keys of the temple. Isn't that interesting? How thankful he was to see all this now fulfilled, and how he had beheld in vision since the house was dedicated. So I guess just within the last couple days, it was dedicated, or the first day of dedication was the 6th, and this is now the 10th. So this part right here is new at the time that this is being recorded. And how he had beheld in vision since the house was dedicated, Joseph Smith, the great prophet, had gathered the hosts of heaven and was present with them. While we shouted Hosanna, they shouted, "Glory to God in the highest." Isn't that interesting? We've been talking a lot about Hosanna shouts on the channel recently. I put together a new spreadsheet, which is a timeline of Hosanna shouts outside of just like the typical temple dedication, or just really what seems to be really, really significant Hosanna shouts. And I think that this is one of them because it's the Salt Lake Temple. But here we're learning, and for all I know, maybe it's like this with every temple dedication, but here we're learning that the other side of the veil was also participating in the Hosanna shout. And in this case, we specifically know there was Joseph Smith, who had gathered the hosts of heaven for the dedication, and they participated as well in the Hosanna shout. While we shouted Hosanna, they shouted, "Glory to God in the highest." All the saints who had passed into the Spirit land since the cornerstone of the temple was laid, and all the priesthood of these latter days were present, and many of the prophets and apostles and 70s of God are here shouting praises to God and the Lamb. The Savior is here and rejoicing with us. And many of those now this next word, I think it said living. That word, I'm not sure. So I have it in brackets. Many of those now living will live to see him in the flesh. The veil is growing thinner. Now, I don't know that I would take that to mean the official second coming. We do know that there were those that were there that did actually see him in the flesh, at least one in President Lorenzo Snow in the Salt Lake Temple. And I have this ongoing project, this spreadsheet for visions and visitations, and the one out of all these heavenly messengers, the one that shows up the most, as you might expect, is Jesus Christ. You have angels in general, just unspecified, unidentified angels, more than one. But for individuals, Jesus Christ is the one that shows up the most. And we don't know how many times he's physically manifested himself to the saints or manifested himself in other ways in the temple. But this is really interesting. Wilford Woodruff knew, because of a vision, that he was going to be the one to dedicate the Salt Lake Temple. And Brigham Young gave him the keys to the temple. I'm guessing that means like spiritual keys. And then Joseph Smith, the host of heaven, prophets, apostles, 70s. This is just amazing. Joining in on the Hosanna shout. Okay, so I'm really happy to have come across that. Let's go ahead and continue. I'll just skip down to this right here. Well, some 80,000 people during a 23-day period of dedicatory services, averaging 2,000 each session, were regenerated. President Woodruff's entry in his journal at the end of that year, 1893, is, quote, "The greatest event of 1893 was the dedication of the Great Salt Lake Temple. Great power was manifested on that occasion," end quote. Now, if you know where I can find any more of these stories about the dedication of the Salt Lake Temple, please send them my way. Right now, we're thinking a lot about the Salt Lake Temple because it's about to be rededicated in 2020. Well, most likely in 2027. The open house for sure is going to go from April until October of 2027. And based on other temples that we've looked at, after the open house, a temple will typically be dedicated just a few weeks or maybe a couple months later. So I'm thinking it probably will be in 2027. There's so many reasons to think that dedication is going to be special. I'm not going to recount everything here, but let me just point out, President Woodruff said that there were two things that happened with the dedication of the Salt Lake Temple. The angels of destruction were released. That's officially when they were released to bring judgments upon the earth. And then the other thing he said is that from the time of the dedication of the Salt Lake Temple onward, the church would find more acceptance among the nations of the earth, essentially. Okay, now we have this incredible experience that we just read, and I wouldn't be surprised if similar things are experienced, witnessed during the rededication. I think it's going to be a really big deal. Continuing. The scriptural phrase that brings all that into a theme is that we are to receive in temples, through temples, from temples, quote unquote, power from on high. See Doctrine and Covenants 95, verse 8. Christ is the source of that power. The temple is his, and every symbol in and out of that sacred structure points toward him, and as a cup carries water, transmits the Spirit of Jesus Christ. You guys, I don't think that they're kidding whenever we read someone talking about power that comes from the temple. I think it's a real actual thing. I feel like I've experienced it in my life. I'm sure that I have, and I'm sure that you have too, if you've been through. Okay, we're not done. There's a little bit more. This section is called A House of Glory. And he says, and now the phrase, a house of glory, a house of God. One of the most tender moments of my spiritual life was the day a woman, Rose Wallace Bennett, authoress of the Gleaner Sheaf, which I looked that up. It looks like it was some kind of like a pamphlet or booklet. I don't think it was like a full-on book, but anyway, this is it right here. So the author of that told me that as a little girl, she was present in the dedicatory services of the Salt Lake Temple. She described also the day Wilford Woodruff had a birthday, his 90th, when it was a little girl's privilege to take forward to him in the tabernacle 90 roses in a setting of some 8,000 children between the ages of 8 and 12, all in white. They had gathered to honor him, and then as he came into the building, under some pretense that there was need of an organ repair, they arose and sang, "We thank thee, O God, for a prophet." She could not talk about what it felt like to see his tears, or again, what it was like to be in the temple without herself weeping. But what she said to me was, quote, "Young man, my father brought me to the edge of City Creek Canyon where we could look down on the temple. I testify to you that there was a light around the temple, and it was not due to electricity." There are such phrases in the authentic literature that has to do with the temple dedications: light, glory, power. Even non-members of the church at Kirtland came running, wondering what had happened. They wondered if the building was on fire. It was, but with what the prophet called, quote-unquote, celestial burnings. And let me just point out right here, I'm not sure which prophet he's referring to. I guess probably Joseph Smith, since he was the one that dedicated the Kirtland Temple. I'm going to have to track that quote down. Okay, celestial burnings. The downflow of the power of the living God, like encircling flame as on the day of Pentecost. A prayer for that had been offered by the prophet and by his father, and it was fulfilled. Okay, so the Salt Lake Temple looking like it had a light around it. I'm not putting that on my spreadsheet called Quotes, Visions, and Visitations because this is narrowed down to heavenly messengers. So for, I don't know, maybe that'll change. But for right now, I've created a new entry on my spreadsheet called Quotes A through Z. So this is currently row 554 for temples glowing. This is not the first time on this channel that we've seen temples glow. Let me just go ahead and read the other two accounts that I have really quick. So we have the Kirtland Temple, and then we have, I believe this one was the Logan Temple. Okay, so let's go to this. All right, so this is in History of the Church, Volume 2, page 428. I'm just going to read the highlighted part. Brother George A. Smith arose and began to prophesy when a noise was heard like the sound of a rushing mighty wind, which filled the temple. And all the congregation simultaneously arose, being moved upon by an invisible power. Many began to speak in tongues and prophesy. Others saw glorious visions. And I beheld the temple was filled with angels, which fact I declared to the congregation. The people of the neighborhood came running together, hearing an unusual sound within, and seeing a bright light like a pillar of fire resting upon the temple, and were astonished at what was taking place. This continued until the meeting closed at 11 p.m. The number of official members present on this occasion was 416, being a greater number than ever assembled on any former occasion. Now, I have heard that this was actually recorded in the local newspaper. In fact, I think Meridian Magazine had done like an interview with some people about that, and they tried to track down that issue, but they weren't able to. I think what I read is they had checked with like, I don't know, some national archives or like the Library of Congress or something, and they had every single issue except for that one. I wish I had that. I wish I had that. That'd be so cool to read that. Okay, anyway, and then we have this. So this is Elder Samuel Riskelly of the 70. Logan, Utah Temple Recorder. So this first part is about a family, the Hales, that there were like a bunch of them that needed to have their work done. And there's this whole story about how it was a lot of work, and basically it happened. They were able to perform all this temple work for this whole family, for all these like records that they had. And then after that was done, it says, let's see, the Hale family had a week-long reunion in the temple about 1905 when they completed the last baptism and endowment. And then on Friday afternoon, the last sealing was done for the 4,000 family members. As President Merrill neared Smithfield that night on his way to Richmond, he turned to tell the temple goodbye, as was his custom, and his heart about jumped out of his body. He could see the temple was on fire, but as he looked at it for a few minutes, he was satisfied that there were no red flames licking upwards. The whole temple was filled with light, and the outside of the building shone with a pale pink glow. That's a very specific detail. All the people in the neighborhood gathered to watch the phenomena and said they heard a heavenly choir sing for nearly 2 hours. Everyone marveled at the sight, for there were no electric lights or other means for lighting the building until 10 years later in 1915. The same thing happened the following night too, with all the rooms and the building lighted and the heavenly choir singing. President Merrill knew that we had had a very heavenly manifestation. When he reported the incident to President Wilford Woodruff, the president asked what special work had been done in the temple. He was told of the unusual activity of the Hale family and how they had accomplished so much in such a little time. President Woodruff said the Hale and Boynton families had been permitted to come from the other side to sing and rejoice and celebrate their deliverance in the Logan Temple. So you can find this in Logan Temple, The First 100 Years by Nolan P. Olson. I'd like to find the primary source, so if you know where I can find that, please let me know. Credit goes to Mark Harris and Dennis Jaramillo, who sent this to me. Okay, so glowing, whether it's the temple or people, seems to be fairly common when it comes to these temple dedications. I have this row, what's currently 222, for halos, light, shining, where individuals are seen glowing, either just like around their head like a traditional halo, or just their face, or maybe their whole body. And I have several of those. One in particular, I'm going to read this really quick, and then I'll finish up. This was in the Kirtland Temple, and this was actually not a dedication. This was just like a meeting that was being held in the Nauvoo Temple. So it says right here, some of the brethren spoke in tongues. Brother Z. Coltrane and Brown held a talk in tongues which was afterwards interpreted and confirmed. Some prophesied. Brother Anderson related a vision, and all of us rejoiced with exceeding great gladness. A light was seen flickering over Brother Anderson's head while relating his vision. Phineas Richards' face shone with great brightness. So that's kind of interesting. With one, there's a flickering light above one of their heads, and then the other one, their face shines. I don't know why that would be, but two different things taking place. And then I like this part right here. Two men arrayed in all priestly garments were seen in the northeast corner of the room. And these were like angels, spirits, angels. I don't know if they were resurrected or not, and it's interesting that they were in the northeast corner. I'm probably going to have to do more research about this, but I know with the temple lot here in Independence, Jackson County, Missouri, Joseph Smith laid a stone to mark the northeast corner of the temple. I know with other temples, like each corner is associated with like the priesthood. Like when you go to the far west temple site, you have the 4 cornerstones, and there's these plaques that say, this cornerstone is for like the first presidency. This one is for, I don't know, the presidency of the Aaronic priesthood, or however it goes. So these 2 angels were in the northeast corner of the room. I think that's really interesting. Okay, so I think that there are more accounts from Wilford Woodruff about his vision of the Salt Lake Temple and him dedicating the Salt Lake Temple. So I'm going to try and track those down. I'm going to scan through this and see what else I can find, and whatever I find, I'll share with you. But that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.